The rain tapped lightly against the wide windows of Clara Hayes's office, a slow and steady rhythm that seemed to mock the storm inside her chest. She sat behind her mahogany desk, fingers clenched around the edge of a letter that had shattered her entire world. The government had denied her visa renewal. 30 days. That was all she had before she would be forced to leave the United States, to abandon everything she had built at Verve magazine. Years of sacrifice, of late nights clawing her way up from an intern to the editor-in-chief, all about to vanish like smoke. Her office door creaked open, and Daniel Cross stepped in without knocking, as usual. He carried a stack of folders in one hand and a coffee in the other. His tie was crooked, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his calm face masking the quick wit he often wielded like a shield. He had worked by her side for 3 years, absorbing every sharp command, every impossible deadline, every sarcastic remark she threw his way. Clara had often wondered why he stayed. She didn't lift her eyes from the letter when she spoke. "Daniel, shut the door." The sound of the latch clicking echoed through the silence. He set the folders on the desk and frowned. "You look like someone told you the world is ending. Do I need to call security or a therapist?" Clara pushed the letter across the desk. "Visa denied. I have 30 days before I'm out." Daniel scanned the letter, his brows lifting slightly before settling back into his usual deadpan expression. "That's catastrophic. Guess the magazine will finally collapse without you screaming at us all day." Clara shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Not funny. If I leave, everything I've worked for is gone. Years of sacrifice, Daniel. Years." He leaned against the edge of her desk, sipping his coffee as if they were talking about the weather. "So what's the plan, boss? Stage a protest? Storm the embassy? Bribe someone?" Clara took a deep breath, her mind spinning, searching, desperate. Then the idea struck her. Mad, reckless, but the only path left. She lifted her eyes to his. "Marriage." Daniel choked on his coffee, coughing violently. "Excuse me?" "You're an American citizen," she said quickly, words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. "You're single. It's perfect. We marry, I get my green card, and after a while we divorce. Simple. Clean. No strings." His jaw fell open, eyes widening in disbelief. Then he let out a short laugh, the kind people use when they hope a nightmare isn't real. "Oh, that's rich. Clara Hayes, queen of control, wants to marry her assistant? That's got to be the best joke you've ever told." "I'm not joking." The laughter died in his throat. He stared at her, searching her face for even a hint of irony. There was none. "Clara, do you realize what you're asking? That's fraud. Federal fraud. We could go to jail. And between the two of us, I'm not cut out for orange jumpsuits." She stood, circling the desk to face him directly, her voice low but fierce. "It's not fraud if we make it convincing. Papers, interviews, photos, it's been done before. All you have to do is sign your name and play along. I'll handle everything else." Daniel shook his head, still half in disbelief. "You've officially lost your mind. This isn't some article deadline you can bully into submission. This is prison time crazy." Clara folded her arms, her voice turning sharper. "Think about it, Daniel. You've endured me for 3 years. You've seen me work myself to the bone for this magazine. Are you really going to stand there and watch everything I've built collapse?" His eyes softened for a fleeting moment, then hardened again. "I'm not marrying you. Not for a promotion, not for free coffee, not even if you promise to. Oh, stop yelling at me." She stepped closer, her desperation clear. "What if I make it worth your while? A salary increase, creative control over projects. You could finally stop being just the assistant." Daniel's laugh was humorless, bitter. "Wow, you really are negotiating this like a business contract." "Because it is," she snapped. "That's all it has to be. A deal. We both play our parts, and then it's over." Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Daniel rubbed his forehead, muttering under his breath. "This is insane. Absolutely insane." Clara's eyes burned with something raw, something he wasn't used to seeing in her. Fear. For a moment, the sharp edges of her persona fell away, leaving only a woman terrified of losing everything. Daniel let out a long, exhausted sigh, shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, but mark my words, Clara Hayes. He met her gaze, his voice low and grim. This will ruin both of us. The taxi rolled down a long road lined with oak trees that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Clara Hayes sat stiffly in the back seat, clutching her leather handbag so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Daniel Cross sat beside her, looking annoyingly calm, as though this weekend was just another errand on his list. Clara had expected a modest family home, maybe a quiet suburban street, but as the car slowed, her heart nearly stopped. Through the window, an iron gate appeared, tall and ornate, guarded by stone pillars. Beyond it was not a house, but an estate, vast and elegant, with manicured gardens and a mansion that rose proudly against the afternoon sky. It was the kind of place one only saw in glossy magazines or on the covers of lifestyle features. Clara blinked, leaning closer to the glass. Daniel, what is this? He didn't even glance at her. Home. The gate swung open, as if on cue, and the car rolled inside. Clara felt her pulse race. She turned sharply to him. Home? You live here? This is a palace. Daniel smirked, finally looking at her. Relax, it's just a hoe. You see, just a house? She hissed, her voice dropping. You've been fetching my coffee and carrying my folders for 3 years, and you never mentioned you were some kind of hidden millionaire? He shrugged casually. It never came up. Clara's chest tightened. All this time she had been treating him like a mere assistant, and here he was, arriving at a mansion with gates tall enough to keep kings away. Her mind scrambled, thinking of every conversation, every sarcastic remark he had thrown her way. He had always been too calm, too self-assured for an assistant. Now it all made sense. The taxi stopped in front of the mansion. Before Clara could gather herself, the massive oak doors opened. An elderly woman with silver hair swept back into a perfect bun stood at the top of the marble steps. Her posture was regal, her gaze sharp as if she could see straight through lies. Daniel's lips curved into a rare smile. Grandmother, he said, climbing the steps to embrace her. Clara followed, her heels clicking nervously against the stone. The woman's eyes moved to her, studying every detail from head to toe. Clara felt as if she were under a spotlight, and no detail of her could escape judgment. So, the grandmother said, her voice smooth but edged like steel. This is the woman who finally captured my grandson's heart. Clara forced a polite smile. It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Cross. The old woman linked arms with Clara, pulling her closer with surprising strength. We shall see if you are as remarkable as he claims. Daniel's amused expression only deepened Clara's unease. She glanced back at him, silently demanding an explanation, but he only shrugged. The grandmother's grip tightened on Clara's arm as she guided her into the mansion. Inside, the halls glowed with warm golden light spilling from chandeliers. Paintings lined the walls, each portrait of Sirius, men and women with the same striking eyes as Daniel. The air was heavy with history, the kind that whispered of power and wealth. Clara felt out of place, her pulse beating faster with every step. As they entered the grand living room, a man and woman rose from their seats. Daniel's parents. His mother's smile was warm but her eyes curious, while his father's handshake was firm, scrutinizing Clara as though she were under oath. Welcome, his father said, though the word carried more weight than warmth. Clara returned the handshake, steadying her voice. Thank you for having me. The family gathered around them, questions firing like arrows. How did you meet? How did Daniel propose? What made you fall in love? Clara's mouth went dry, her rehearsed answers fleeing from her mind. Daniel, of course, stepped in, spinning a tale of candlelit dinners and heartfelt confessions. His voice was steady, his smile disarmingly charming. Clara wanted to strangle him and thank him at the same time. But then his grandmother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. Love, she said softly, is not built on stories. Love is revealed in silence, in glances, in the spaces between words. We shall see if your love is real. Clara's heart thudded against her ribs. She realized with a cold shiver that this was no ordinary visit. This was a test, and one wrong move could shatter everything. Before she could catch her breath, the grandmother clapped her hands together. "The guest room has been prepared for you both. But of course, you are a married couple, are you not? You will share it." Clara froze, staring at Daniel. His smirk widened, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Of course, grandmother," he said smoothly. "We wouldn't have it any other way." And with that, Clara felt her knees weaken. The game had officially begun, and she wasn't sure she was ready to play. The guest room door clicked shut behind them, and Clara stood frozen, her back pressed against the polished wood. The walls were painted in soft ivory, a chandelier hung low, and at the center of the room stood a grand bed with velvet covers. One bed, not two. One. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Daniel tossed his bag on a chair, loosening his tie as if nothing about this situation was alarming. "This is madness," Clara whispered, her eyes darting between him and the bed. "Relax," he said, shrugging off his jacket. "Couples share rooms. Couples share beds. You want this to be believable, don't you?" Her lips parted, ready to fire back, but footsteps outside silenced her. Voices echoed in the hallway. The family was lingering, listening, testing. Clara forced a stiff smile and crossed the room, lowering her voice. "Fine, but stay on your side. I'll draw an invisible line, and if you cross it, you're dead." Daniel smirked, leaning against the bedpost. "I wouldn't dream of it." Dinner that night was worse than Clara could have imagined. The long dining table glittered with crystal glasses and silver cutlery, each place setting perfect, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Daniel's parents sat at the head, his grandmother nearby with eyes as sharp as knives. Every word Clara spoke seemed to be measured, weighed, dissected. "So, Clara," his mother asked sweetly, though her gaze never wavered, "how did Daniel propose to you?" Clara froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. The story. She hadn't rehearsed it. She glanced at Daniel, silently begging for help. He smiled easily, leaning back in his chair as if he'd been waiting for this. "It was at a candlelit dinner," he began, his voice warm, steady. "I had flowers delivered, the table set perfectly, and when I got down on one knee, Clara cried." Clara nearly choked. Crying was not in her nature. She forced a tight smile. "Yes, it was emotional." His grandmother tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Did you cry because you were happy or because you were surprised?" Clara's palms grew damp. This was no simple question. It was a trap. She lifted her chin, fighting to keep her voice calm. "Because I realized in that moment I couldn't imagine my life without him." For the first time, Daniel's smirk faltered. His eyes flickered toward her, something unreadable passing across his face. The questions continued, sharp and relentless. Who said "I love you" first? Where was your first kiss? What habits of his annoy you most? Clara's mind spun, each answer a careful step across a tightrope. Daniel rescued her whenever she faltered, weaving lies with dangerous ease. And yet, the way he looked at her, steady, amused, almost proud, made her chest tighten in ways she wasn't prepared for. When the plates were cleared, the grandmother leaned back in her chair, her gaze cutting straight through Clara. "Love is not about rehearsed answers," she said softly. "It's about instinct. Tomorrow, we shall see more of yours." Clara managed a polite smile, but her insides were trembling. She didn't know if she was terrified of being caught or terrified of how real it was starting to feel. Later, when they returned to the room, she shut the door and spun on Daniel. "You enjoyed that far too much," he chuckled, undoing his cufflinks. "Admit it, we were convincing." She glared, fire in her eyes. "Convincing is one thing, but your grandmother doesn't believe me. I saw it in her face. She's waiting for me to slip up." Daniel's smirk faded into something darker, something that made her throat tighten. "Then don't slip." He turned away, and Clara stood rooted in place, her heart thudding. For the first time since this madness began, she wasn't sure if she feared his family more, or Daniel himself. The morning sun poured through the tall windows, spilling gold light across the floorboards. Clara stirred awake, realizing with a jolt that Daniel was only inches away. At some point in the night, The invisible line she had drawn had vanished. His arm lay draped casually over the blanket between them, his breathing steady and calm. Clara sat up quickly, pressing a hand to her racing chest. This wasn't supposed to feel like anything. It was supposed to be a performance. She hurried to the bathroom, splashed water on her face, and whispered to herself in the mirror, "Stay sharp. It's all fake. It has to be." When she returned, Daniel was awake, leaning against the headboard with his usual infuriating smirk. "Good morning, wife." Clara rolled her eyes and reached for her blazer. "Don't start." Before Daniel could tease her further, there was a knock at the door. His grandmother's voice floated in. "Breakfast is waiting. Don't keep us long." Clara's stomach tightened. She dreaded the thought of another interrogation, but nothing could have prepared her for the new guest waiting downstairs. As they stepped into the dining hall, Clara froze. A tall, striking blonde in a crimson dress sat comfortably at the table, her smile sharp and knowing. Daniel stopped mid-step, his expression flickering before he composed himself. "Vanessa," he said evenly. The woman rose gracefully and kissed him on the cheek. "It's been too long, Daniel." Then her gaze slid to Clara, cool and assessing. "And this must be the new wife. How fascinating." Clara forced a smile, though her pulse raced. "Clara Hayes." "Vanessa Steele," the woman replied, her voice dripping with confidence. "Daniel's old friend." The way she said it made Clara's skin prickle. She didn't need to ask to know this was the infamous ex. Throughout breakfast, Vanessa steered the conversation with ease, asking innocent questions that were anything but harmless. "So, Clara, when was your first kiss? Daniel has such a particular way of kissing, doesn't he? Passionate, but patient." Clara gripped her fork. Her mind screamed that this was a trap, but Daniel stepped in smoothly, slipping his hand over hers. "Some things are private, Vanessa. Unlike you, I don't share every detail." Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but her eyes gleamed with challenge. Clara tried to focus on her coffee, but she could feel the tension in the room thickening, each glance from the grandmother sharp. Then the last. After breakfast, Clara wandered into the garden, desperate for air. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy and sweet, but it wasn't enough to calm her nerves. She barely heard the footsteps until Vanessa appeared beside her. "You're playing a dangerous game," Vanessa murmured, her tone stripped of all sweetness. "I know Daniel. He never wanted marriage. Not with me, not with anyone. And now you suddenly appear. It doesn't add up." Clara straightened her shoulders, refusing to look intimidated. "People change." Vanessa's laugh was low and humorless. "Not Daniel. I'll find out what you're hiding, and when I do, this little charade of yours will crumble." Clara's breath caught, but she forced herself to meet Vanessa's gaze. "Good luck with that." Vanessa leaned in, her smile vicious. "I don't need luck. I already see the cracks." She walked away, leaving Clara trembling in the middle of the garden. For the first time since this plan began, Clara realized the danger wasn't only the government or Daniel's family. It was Vanessa, the woman who would stop at nothing to expose her. When Clara returned inside, Daniel was waiting in the hall. He studied her pale face, his smirk gone. "What did she say to you?" Clara swallowed hard. "She's going to destroy me." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low, his eyes suddenly serious. "Then we don't give her the chance. From now on, Clara, you're mine." Her heart stuttered at the way he said it. She wasn't sure if it was part of the game, or something far more dangerous. The dining room glowed with candlelight that evening, the long table dressed in crystal and silver, every detail designed to impress. Clara sat beside Daniel, trying to steady her breath as voices and laughter filled the air. She knew this dinner was more than a family gathering. It was another test, another stage where she and Daniel had to perform flawlessly. Vanessa swept into the room in a black satin gown that shimmered with every step. Her smile was sharp, her presence commanding, and Clara felt the temperature drop the moment she sat across from them. The grandmother greeted Vanessa warmly, as if she were already part of the family, and Clara's nerves tightened like a wire pulled too far. All through dinner, Vanessa's words sliced through the conversation. "Daniel always told me he would never settle down. Isn't it strange how suddenly that changed? She tilted her head toward Clara with mock sweetness. "Tell us, what made him propose so quickly?" Clara forced her lips into a smile, but her throat felt dry. Before she could stumble, Daniel leaned in and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Because when you meet the right person, Vanessa, everything changes." His voice was steady, his eyes locked on Clara's as if daring her to look away. She didn't. Something in the warmth of his gaze almost made her believe it herself. The table quieted, all eyes on them. Vanessa's smile faltered for just a second, and Clara's chest swelled with a flicker of triumph. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her tone light but laced with venom. "How romantic. And what about the proposal itself? Did you cry, Clara?" Daniel always liked when his gestures made people cry. The grandmother's eyes sharpened, Clara's pulse spiked. She opened her mouth, desperate to find the right words, when Daniel moved faster than her thoughts. He stood, pulling Clara up with him, and before she could breathe, his lips were on hers. It wasn't a polite kiss. It wasn't staged. It was deep and deliberate, the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt. Clara gasped against him, but couldn't pull away. Her knees weakened as the room blurred, her senses drowning in the heat of his touch. When Daniel finally pulled back, the was silent. He looked at Vanessa directly. "Does that answer your question?" Gasps and whispers rippled down the table. The grandmother leaned back, her expression unreadable. But Clara caught the faintest glimmer of approval in her eyes. Vanessa, however, sat frozen, her nails digging into the tablecloth. Clara struggled to catch her breath, her heart pounding wildly. That kiss had not been part of their deal. That kiss had felt real, and that was what terrified her most. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze. Clara smiled, nodded, answered questions, but her mind replayed the kiss again and again. When the plates were cleared and the guests drifted into the drawing room, she slipped onto the balcony for air. The night was cool, stars scattered across the dark sky. She gripped the railing, whispering to herself, "It was just for show. That's all it was." But then Daniel appeared behind her, his voice low, almost teasing. "Convincing, wasn't it?" Clara spun around, her chest tightening. "You had no right to do that." He stepped closer, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "I had every right. You wanted them to believe us. Now they do." Her breath hitched. She wanted to push him away, to tell him he had gone too far. But the truth was, her lips were still tingling, her heart still racing. She turned back toward the night sky, her voice trembling. "Don't ever do that again." Daniel leaned against the railing beside her, his presence warm and unsettling. "Then tell me you didn't feel anything. Say the words, and I'll never do it again." Clara couldn't. Her silence hung heavy in the air, more dangerous than any confession, and Daniel's faint smile told her he already knew the answer. Clara woke the next morning with her heart still heavy from the kiss she couldn't forget. She barely had time to compose herself when the grandmother appeared at the door, dressed immaculately as always, her cane tapping against the polished floor. Her eyes lingered on Clara with quiet calculation. "Walk with me, dear," she said, leaving no room for refusal. Clara followed her into the gardens where roses climbed trellises and the air smelled of earth and blossoms. The grandmother handed her a pair of gloves and pointed to a patch of soil. "Ethan, Daniel as you call him, has always loved gardens. Tell me, what do you two plant together?" Clara froze, the question striking like a knife. She slipped the gloves on to buy time, kneeling at the soil. "We plant memories," she said slowly, forcing a smile. "He loves roses. I help keep them alive." The grandmother bent down, her sharp eyes never leaving Clara's face. "Strange. He never once mentioned roses to me." Clara's chest tightened, panic swirling beneath her calm mask. She stabbed at the soil with the trowel, her voice even. "That's because some things he saves for me." The grandmother straightened, silent for a moment, before giving a small smile that was impossible to read. "Perhaps." The hours passed in small, unnerving trials. In the kitchen, Clara was asked to cook a family recipe she had never heard of. At the piano, she was asked to play a song Daniel supposedly loved. Each time she stumbled, and each time Daniel appeared, covering for her with effortless charm. But his grandmother's gaze grew sharper, as though each mistake confirmed her suspicions. That afternoon, Clara stood by the lake at the edge of the estate, watching the ripples catch the sunlight. She tried to steady her nerves, but every detail felt like it was slipping out of her control. She was a woman who built her career on precision and strategy, and now she was drowning in lies she couldn't manage. Daniel appeared beside her, hands in his pockets, his expression unusually serious. "She's testing you." Clara's laugh was humorless. "Thank you for the revelation. I thought she was just trying to ruin me for sport." He smirked faintly. "You're holding your own better than I expected." "Solo?" Ara turned to him, frustration bubbling. "I am not here to impress your family, Daniel. I am here to survive. But your ex is circling like a hawk. Your grandmother looks at me like I'm a fraud. And every second I feel the ground slipping under my feet." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. "Then lean on me." Her chest tightened at the intensity in his eyes. For a moment she forgot this was fake, forgot the deal, forgot the lies. But before she could speak, a voice cut through the air. Vanessa stood a few steps away, her arms crossed, her smile sharp. "Touching, very touching, but it doesn't matter how well you act, Clara. I know the truth, and sooner or later, so will they." Clara's breath caught, and Daniel's jaw clenched. Vanessa's words hung in the air like a storm about to break, and Clara knew the danger was no longer about surviving a grandmother's questions. It was about surviving Vanessa's obsession to expose them. The chandeliers blazed with golden light, casting glitter across the ballroom as music swelled through the air. Guests in gowns and tailored suits filled the room, their whispers carrying like smoke as Clara and Daniel entered side by side. Every pair of eyes turned toward them. Clara held her head high, but inside her chest, her heart was beating too fast, too wild. This was not just another evening. This was the family's grand ball, the moment when every crack in their story could be revealed. Daniel leaned down, his voice brushing her ear. "Smile, Clara. They can smell fear." She forced a smile, her arm looped through his, and allowed him to guide her toward the center of the ballroom. At the far end, his grandmother stood like a queen overseeing her court. Vanessa was already there, shimmering in emerald silk, her eyes locked on Clara with predatory intent. The music shifted, and the grandmother raised her voice. "Tradition dictates that the newlyweds open the dance." Clara's blood ran cold. She glanced at Daniel, whispering, "I don't dance." He smiled with maddening calm. "Then pretend." He took her hand and led her to the fall. The orchestra began, the violins swelling, and Daniel pulled her close. At first, her movements were stiff, clumsy, but his hand at her waist guided her with a confidence that made the world blur around them. She felt her body respond in ways she couldn't control, her steps falling into rhythm with his. Around them, whispers floated. "She's not from here." Strange how sudden the marriage was. "Do you believe it?" Clara's skin burned under their scrutiny, but Daniel's eyes never left hers. "You're doing fine," he murmured. "I feel like I'm about to collapse," she hissed back. His smile deepened. "Then lean on me." The music swelled higher, and before Clara could react, Daniel spun her into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't staged. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with a heat that left her dizzy. The crowd erupted in applause, convinced they were watching a couple hopelessly in love. But Clara's mind spun, torn between anger and the terrifying realization that she hadn't wanted the kiss to end. When the dance finished, they stepped aside, surrounded instantly by guests. Vanessa appeared at their side, her smile venomous. "Lovely performance, almost believable." Clara opened her mouth to respond, but Vanessa leaned in closer, her voice a whisper meant only for them. "I spoke to someone in the city office today. Funny thing, there's no record of your marriage license filed where it should be." Clara's heart lurched. She turned to Daniel in panic, but his face remained unreadable, his jaw tight. Vanessa's smile widened at Clara's silence. "What's the matter, darling? Afraid your perfect little story is about to unravel?" Before Clara could answer, Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but dangerous. Careful, Vanessa. You're playing with fire. Vanessa's eyes glittered. Oh, Daniel, I always did love fire. She swept away into the cry, out leaving Clara trembling. She turned to Daniel, her voice shaking. What did she mean? Is she right? Did you even file the license? He held her gaze, his silence louder than any answer. And in that silence, Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. For the first time, she wondered if the biggest lie wasn't hers at all. Clara stormed into the corridor, her heels striking the marble like warning shots. The music from the ballroom faded behind her, but the roar in her head only grew louder. Daniel followed, his calm footsteps mocking her fury. She spun on him, her voice sharp. Tell me the truth. Did you even file our marriage license? Daniel's expression was unreadable, his eyes shadowed. Clara, this isn't the place. Her hands trembled as she shoved at his chest. Don't you dare dodge me. Vanessa knew something, and she was too confident to be bluffing. If this is all a bigger lie than I thought, I need to know now. For the first time, Daniel's mask cracked, his jaw clenched, his shoulders tense. He leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. What if I didn't file it? What if I wanted you to see what it feels like when the ground shakes beneath you? You think you're always in control, Clara, but you're not. Not with me. Her breath caught. The hallway seemed to close in around them. So all of this was never about helping me? His gaze burned into hers. It was about us, and you're too afraid to admit it. She felt her chest twist, torn between fury and something far more dangerous, something she couldn't name. But before she could answer, Vanessa's laugh echoed from the other end of the corridor. She stepped out of the shadows, her emerald dress catching the light like poison in a glass. Well, Vanessa purred, this is interesting. A wife who isn't really a wife. A husband who can't keep his lies straight. Tell me, Clara, do you even know the man you're pretending to love? Clara's stomach dropped. Vanessa's words were louder than the music behind them, and if anyone overheard, the aid would crumble. Clara grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him away from the ballroom toward the darkened side of the estate. When they reached the study, she slammed the door shut. Her voice was ragged. She's going to expose us. I can feel it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, uncharacteristically restless. Let her try. If she tells them, she risks destroying herself too. My grandmother doesn't take kindly to lies, even from her favorites. Clara paced, her nerves unraveling. You act like this is a game, but if we're caught, I lose everything. My career, my future. Do you even care about that? Daniel moved toward her, catching her wrist and stopping her in place. His touch was firm but not harsh, his eyes locking onto hers. What I care about is that you've been lying to yourself since the day we started this. This isn't just about papers or visas anymore, and you know it. Clara's throat tightened, her voice barely a whisper. You're wrong. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. Then prove it. Look me in the eye and tell me that kiss at the ball meant nothing. Clara froze, her lips parting, but the words refused to come. The silence stretched, filled only by the pounding of her heart. Daniel's grip softened, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin, and the intensity in his eyes softened into something that scared her more than his anger. Exactly what I thought, he murmured. Clara yanked her hand back, desperate to regain her defenses. This is a disaster. You've dragged me into something I can't control. Daniel stepped back, his expression turning cold again. Maybe that's the best thing that could have happened to you. Before she could respond, the door creaked open. The grandmother stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes darting between them. Is there something you'd like to tell me, Daniel? Clara's blood ran cold, the lie as no longer just theirs to protect. The walls were closing in, and one wrong word could destroy everything. The grandmother's eyes lingered on them in the study, sharp as glass, her cane tapping softly against the floor. Clara's throat dried. She wanted to speak, to explain, but every word twisted in her chest like a knot. Daniel, however, stood steady, his face unreadable, the perfect mask of composure. "We were just talking," he said calmly. The grandmother's gaze shifted to Clara. Talking rarely leaves a woman shaking and pale, as if she has seen a ghost. Clara forced a weak smile, her palms slick with sweat. It was nothing important, just nerves. The grandmother leaned closer, her whisper low but heavy. "Love that is real does not look like nerves. It looks like fire. Be careful, Clara. Fire can either warm or burn." She left them in silence, the echo of her words following Clara into the night. Clara could barely breathe. The walls of the mansion felt too close, the secrets too heavy. When she turned to Daniel, he wasn't smirking anymore. He looked almost tired. "This isn't going to hold," she whispered. "She's going to see through us, and Vanessa won't get the chance," Daniel cut in. "I'll make sure of it." But his words didn't reassure her, because for the first time, she wasn't sure if Daniel was protecting her or hiding something from her. The following morning, the mansion buzzed with preparations for the final day of the ball. Guests would arrive in droves, the perfect stage for Vanessa to strike. Clara's stomach knotted as she dressed in a midnight blue gown, her reflection pale and restless. She rehearsed lines in her head, excuses, smiles, anything to keep the mask from slipping. When she descended the staircase, the room fell silent for a moment. Daniel waited at the bottom, his black suit tailored perfectly, his gaze sweeping over her. For the briefest instant, the tension cracked, and his eyes softened with something real, something that made her heart stutter. But then the guests clapped, and the performance began again. The night was a blur of introductions, congratulations, toasts. Clara smiled until her cheeks hurt, clung to Daniel's arm until her fingers ached, and then Vanessa appeared. She moved like a predator through the crowd, her emerald dress catching every light, her smile slicing through the air. She raised her glass, her voice carrying just enough to silence the room. "To Daniel and Clara," she said sweetly. "A love story so sudden, so unexpected, one can hardly believe it's real." Gasps, chuckles, whispers. Clara's heart raced. Vanessa stepped closer, eyes glinting with victory. "In fact, I happen to know something about their marriage. Something you all may find interesting." The crowd leaned in. Clara's chest tightened, her throat closing. This was it, the moment the lie would collapse. But before Vanessa could continue, Daniel stepped forward and kissed Clara with a passion that stole her breath and silenced the room. It wasn't a polite kiss. It wasn't staged. It was raw, desperate, and real enough to make Clara's knees weaken. When he pulled back, the ballroom erupted in applause. Vanessa's face twisted, fury flashing in her eyes as her moment shattered. But Clara barely noticed the crowd. Her body was still trembling, her lips still burning, and her mind screamed at her that this wasn't supposed to happen. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the mansion had quieted, Clara searched for Daniel. She found him in the library, staring out at the moonlit gardens. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "You can't keep doing this. These kisses, these games. I don't know what's real anymore." Daniel turned, his expression stripped bare. "Then stop pretending it's just a game." Clara's heart pounded. She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, he said something that made her knees nearly buckle. "I love you." The words were soft but heavy, dropping into the air like stones into still water, rippling through everything. Clara froze, her world splitting in two. Part of her wanted to believe him. The other part whispered it was all another lie. Her lips trembled. "You can't say that." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes steady, unflinching. "I just did." And in that moment, Clara realized nothing would ever be the same again. Clara lay awake in the guest room long after Daniel's words had shattered the silence of the library. "I love you." 3 words that should have been impossible in a marriage built on lies, yet they pulsed in her chest like a secret she could no longer bury. By dawn, Daniel was gone. His clothes were missing from the chair, his suitcase vanished. Panic clawed at her throat as she rushed downstairs only to find his grandmother waiting, her gaze solemn and knowing. "He's leaving," the old woman said softly, as though she had read Clara's thoughts. "He told me he won't chain himself to someone who can't admit the truth." Clara's heart fractured. She didn't even say goodbye. Without another word, she grabbed her coat and bolted from the mansion. The drive to the airport blurred, her mind racing with every memory of Daniel's smile, his sarcastic remarks, the way his lips had lingered on hers at the ball. She couldn't lose him, not now. The airport was alive with noise, travelers weaving in every direction, voices echoing against high ceilings. Clara's eyes darted wildly until she saw him at the departure gate, tall and steady, his hand gripping a suitcase. Her throat closed at the sight of him walking away. "Daniel!" she shouted, her voice breaking through the noise. He stopped, slowly turning. His eyes widened when he saw her running toward him, breathless, trembling, desperate. People stopped to watch, curious murmurs rippling around them. Clara didn't care. She planted herself in front of him, her chest heaving, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm a coward," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I hid behind a contract and a lie because I was terrified of love. But you," her voice cracked, "you broke through every wall I built, and I can't let you walk away, not when I finally know the truth. I love you." For a moment, the world froze. Daniel's eyes softened, his suitcase slipping from his hand. Then he crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. His kiss silenced the whispers around them, a kiss that was raw and real and full of everything they had tried to deny. The crowd burst into applause, but Clara barely heard it. All that mattered was Daniel's heartbeat pressed against hers. When they finally pulled apart, his hand cupped her cheek. "I was waiting for you to say that." Clara laughed through her tears. "So what happens now?" Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He knelt right there in the middle of the airport, the noise of rolling suitcases and boarding calls fading to nothing. "I married you once for a lie," he said, his voice steady and strong. "Now I want to do it for love. No deals, no contracts, no games. Clara Hayes, will you marry me for real?" Her breath caught. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The crowd erupted again as Daniel slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her, sealing their fate. Weeks later, the garden at the Cross estate was transformed with white flowers and candlelight. Clara walked down the aisle in a gown of delicate lace, every step carrying her closer to the man waiting at the altar. Daniel's eyes never left her, filled with a love that no longer needed pretending. When they spoke their vows, Clara's voice shook but never faltered. "I spent my life running from love, but you taught me that it's worth every risk. You are my chaos, my safety, my only truth." Daniel took her hands, his smile breaking through his composure. "I never believed in love until I met you, and now it's the only thing I'll ever believe in." The officiant's words blurred, but Clara heard the most important ones. Husband and wife. Daniel pulled her close and kissed her, and this time there was no audience to convince, no performance to maintain. It was real, it was theirs, and it was forever. In that moment, Clara knew the lie that had once bound them had become the greatest truth of her life. They had pretended to be married. But in the end, the millionaire whispered, "I love you," and everything changed.